What happens when a beloved Southern comedian finally gets pushed too far on live television? The answer becomes one of the most unexpected, shock-filled moments in late-night history. And the wildest part? It all started so harmlessly. Before we dive into what really went down, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments how you feel about this entire situation. Because, trust me, you're going to have opinions. Leanne Morgan walked onto the Tonight Show stage to roaring applause. The studio was packed with fans who had followed her for years, and the energy was buzzing. Jimmy Fallon welcomed her with that big, enthusiastic grin, stretching his arms open as she approached the chair. "Leanne Morgan, everybody!" He beamed. Clapping along with the audience, "It is so good to have you here. I've been watching your specials, and I have to say you are one of the funniest people working today." Leanne smiled, warm and steady, settling into her seat. "Well, thank you, Jimmy. That's sweet of you. I'm just happy to be here, so your new tour is selling out everywhere," Jimmy continued, leaning forward with genuine excitement. "What's it like going from tiny comedy clubs to these massive theaters?" Leanne laughed. "You know, it's surreal. I remember doing shows for maybe 12 people, and half of those were related to me. Now I walk out to thousands and wonder if they meant to buy tickets to my show or if someone made a mistake." The audience cracked up, and Jimmy grinned. "That's amazing. And your comedy? It's so relatable. You talk about marriage, kids getting older. Where does all that material come from?" "Well, I've been married over 30 years, Leanne replied. "I've got 3 kids, and let me tell you, they've given me plenty to work with. And my husband? He's the most patient man alive. He has to be, living with me." Jimmy nodded. "I love that. And you're from Tennessee, right? Small town?" "Yes, sir. Born and raised. Population about 2,000. And that's counting the dogs." The crowd chuckled. Everything felt light, smooth, easy. But then something shifted. Jimmy's tone tightened, subtle, but unmistakable. "So, Leanne," he said, tilting his head slightly, "I've got to ask you something." The way he said it made Leanne straighten up, just a touch. "Your comedy is very wholesome, very family-friendly. Do you ever feel like you're limiting yourself by staying in that lane? I mean, some of the biggest comedians push boundaries. They go dark. They take risks. Do you ever think about doing that?" Leanne's smile held, but only barely. "Well, Jimmy, I don't feel limited at all. I tell stories that are true to who I am. That's what people connect with. They see themselves in what I say." Right, Jimmy replied, but he didn't look convinced. He leaned in again. "But don't you think comedy is supposed to push buttons? Make people uncomfortable sometimes? I think comedy is about making people laugh," Leanne said calmly, though her southern accent sharpened just slightly. "And there are a million ways to do that. I don't need to curse or shock anybody. My life is funny enough." Jimmy leaned back with a strange half-smile. "Okay, but be honest. Do you think clean comedy is as respected as edgier comedy? Because when people talk about the greats, they talk about the ones who pushed limits, who said things that made people gasp." The audience grew noticeably quieter. Something was changing in the air. Leanne's expression hardened. "Jimmy, I've sold out Radio City Music Hall," she said, steady and firm. "I've got Netflix specials that millions have watched. I'm doing just fine without trying to make people gasp. Respect comes from connecting with your audience, not from proving how edgy you can be." Jimmy held up his hands. Sure. I'm just saying there's a difference between being funny and being safe. And maybe your comedy is a little too safe." And at that moment, the room went absolutely silent. Leanne stared at Jimmy for a long, unblinking moment, and you could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes. The smile she'd carried through the interview was gone. Wiped clean. "Too safe?" she repeated slowly. "Jimmy, are you seriously sitting here telling me my comedy is too safe?" "I'm just asking a question," Jimmy replied, but the confidence in his voice had thinned noticeably. "I mean, you have to admit you play it pretty safe up there." Leanne leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Let me tell you something about safe, Jimmy. I have spent years perfecting my craft. I've worked rooms where people did not want to laugh, where they sat with their arms crossed, daring me to fail, and I won them over. Not by being shocking, but by being real. So don't sit there and tell me I'm playing it safe when you don't know the first thing about what it takes to do what I do." Jimmy shifted in his seat okay. "I think maybe we're getting a little off track." "No, Leanne, cut in. We're exactly on track. You brought this up. You wanted this conversation, so let's have it." Jimmy tried to laugh, but the tension in the room was heavy enough to cut. The band members exchanged wide-eyed glances. The audience sat frozen, unsure if this was some bit or an actual live meltdown unfolding in front of them. "Look, Leanne," Jimmy said, attempting to take back control. "I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just saying, in comedy, sometimes you need to take risks to stay relevant. The landscape is changing. Audiences want different things." Leanne's eyebrows shot up. "Stay relevant? Jimmy, my last special came out 6 months ago, and it's still in the top 10 on Netflix. My tour is adding dates because people keep demanding more. What exactly sounds irrelevant to you?" "That's not what I'm saying," Jimmy protested, his smile tightening by the second. "I'm talking about artistic evolution. Challenging yourself, like, do you ever push yourself outside your comfort zone?" "My comfort zone?" Leanne echoed. And now there was a razor edge in her voice that made even Jimmy flinch. "You think talking about real life, about being a wife, a mother, aging in a world that discards women over a certain age, you think that's a comfort zone? You think that's easy?" Jimmy opened his mouth, but Leanne wasn't done. "Let me tell you what's actually safe, Jimmy. Safe is sitting behind this desk with a team of writers feeding you jokes. Safe is doing the exact same monologue format that's been done for 60 years. Safe is never having to stand under a spotlight alone with nothing but your own material, wondering if the crowd will laugh or stare at you in dead silence." The audience was utterly still. A few people in the front row had hands over their mouths. This was no bit. This was a collision. Jimmy's face had turned a deep shade of red. "Okay, that's a little unfair. I work very hard on this show." "I'm sure you do," Leanne said, her voice dripping sarcasm. "But don't lecture me about playing it safe when you've never had to do what I do. Stand-up comedy isn't safe. It's terrifying. Every single night." All right, Jimmy said quickly, desperate to change the subject. "Let's move on. Let's talk about your family, your kids." But Leanne wasn't backing down. "No, Jimmy. You started this. You wanted to talk about my comedy not being edgy enough. So let's finish it." Jimmy glanced off stage toward his producer, but there was no help coming. He was on his own. "I just think," he said carefully, choosing each word like it might explode, "that maybe you're limiting your audience by keeping things so wholesome." Leanne's laugh was dry, void of humor. "Sunshine and rainbows," she repeated, the sarcasm thick in her voice. "Jimmy, have you actually watched any of my specials, or are you just going off whatever your team told you in the pre-interview?" Jimmy fell silent, his face betraying no answer. Leanne's gaze hardened. "That's what I thought," she said, shaking her head. "You know what's really going on here? You don't respect what I do. You think because I don't drop F-bombs every other sentence, because I don't talk about sex or drugs, that somehow my comedy is lesser, that it's easy, that it doesn't count." "That's not true," Jimmy muttered, but there was no conviction in his words. "It absolutely is true," Leanne shot back, her tone steely. "And you know what the worst part is? I expected this from some people, but I thought you, of all people, would understand. You built your career on being likable, on being the nice guy, and now you're sitting here trying to tear me down for doing the exact same thing." Jimmy's jaw tightened, frustration flashing in his eyes. "I'm not trying to tear you down, Leanne. I'm just trying to have a conversation." "No, you're trying to make yourself look edgy by making me look soft," Leanne said. her voice rising with intensity. "You're trying to show your audience that you can ask the tough questions, that you're not just some softball interviewer, but you picked the wrong person to try that with." The room had gone still. Some in the front row were even pulling out their phones to record the moment, despite the no-recording policy. This was quickly turning into a television moment that would be talked about for years. "I think we should take a break," Jimmy suggested weakly. "Oh, now you want to take a break?" Leanne replied, her voice sharp. "Now that you've realized you stepped in it?" "No, Jimmy. You wanted this conversation in front of your audience, so we're going to finish it right here." Jimmy sank deeper into his chair, visibly uncomfortable, wishing he could disappear. "Leanne, I apologize if I upset you," he said, his voice strained. "That wasn't my intention." Leanne looked him dead in the eye. "Your intention was to make me look like some small-time comedian who doesn't get real comedy," she said, her words deliberate. "And I'm telling you right now, that's not who I am. I've earned every single thing I've gotten in this career. I've worked harder than you can imagine, and I don't need your approval or anyone else's to know that what I do matters." "I never said it didn't matter," Jimmy started, but Leanne cut him off. "You implied it," she replied. "When you ask if my comedy is too safe, when you suggest I need to push boundaries to be taken seriously, you're implying that what I do isn't enough. That I'm not enough." Jimmy tried to speak, but Leanne cut him off. "You implied it," she said, her voice firm. "When you ask if my comedy is too safe, when you suggest I need to push boundaries to be taken seriously, you're implying that what I do right now isn't enough. That I'm not enough." Jimmy looked rattled. He had hosted countless interviews, handled awkward moments with ease, but this felt different. Leanne wasn't backing down, and the audience could feel the raw authenticity of her anger. "Leanne, I think you're misunderstanding what I was trying to say," Jimmy said, his voice quieter now. "I have a lot of respect for you. I really do." "Do you, though?" Leanne asked, her head tilting slightly. "Because respect means you do your homework. Respect means you don't invite someone on your show just to belittle their work. Respect means you recognize there are different kinds of comedy, and they're all valid," she added. Jimmy nodded quickly, finally acknowledging her point. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I should have prepared better. I should have watched your specials." "Yes, you should have," Leanne agreed. "But it's bigger than that, Jimmy. This is about how women in comedy get treated. We get asked different questions than men do. We get judged by different standards. And I'm tired of it," the audience murmured in agreement. Several women in the front row nodded their heads emphatically. "When a male comedian talks about his family, about everyday life, he's considered observational and brilliant," Leanne continued, her passion evident. "But when a woman does it, she's playing it safe. She's not edgy enough. Do you see the double standard there?" Jimmy shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I hear what you're saying." "Do you?" Leanne pressed. "Because I've been hearing this my entire career. People have told me I need to be more like this comedian or that one. I need to be dirtier, meaner. I need to be anything other than what I am. And I spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why my natural voice wasn't good enough." Her voice cracked slightly, and the audience leaned in, hanging on every word. "And then I realized," she continued, her resolve clear, "there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with a system that tells women they have to be something they're not to succeed. That tells us our experiences aren't interesting enough, important enough, or funny enough." Jimmy looked down at his desk, visibly taken aback. "I never thought about it that way." "Most people don't," Leanne replied. "That's the problem. These biases are so ingrained that people don't even realize they have them. You probably thought you were asking a legitimate question about artistic growth, but what you were really doing was questioning my entire approach to comedy, my entire identity as a performer." The audience started clapping, slowly at first, then building to a crescendo. Leanne acknowledged them with a small nod, but her focus remained on Jimmy. I came on this show tonight excited to talk about my tour, to share some funny stories, to connect with your audience, Leanne said, her voice steady but firm. Instead, I got ambushed with questions designed to make me defend my choices, my style, my entire career. That's not okay, Jimmy. You're right, Jimmy said, his voice sounding genuinely remorseful. I completely messed this up. I'm sorry, Leanne raised an eyebrow. Are you sorry you did it? Or are you sorry you got called out on it? Jimmy paused, considering her question carefully. I'm sorry I did it. Truly. I let my own preconceptions cloud my judgment, and I disrespected you in the process. That was wrong. Leanne studied his face for a long moment, searching for sincerity in his words. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. Here's what bothers me most, Leanne finally said. I bet you've had male comedians on this show who do clean comedy. I bet you didn't ask them if they were playing it safe. I bet you didn't question whether they were limiting themselves. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He couldn't argue with that. She was right. Leanne named a few fellow comedians, Jim Gaffigan, Brian Regan, Jerry Seinfeld, all brilliant comedians who keep their material relatively clean. Did you ever ask them if they were being too safe? No, Jimmy admitted quietly. I didn't. Because they're men, Leanne said simply. And men get the benefit of the doubt. Men get to be themselves without constantly having to justify their choices. The audience was absolutely riveted. What started as a typical late-night interview had morphed into a powerful statement on industry sexism. Leanne's tone softened slightly, but her words hit hard. I'm not trying to destroy you here, Jimmy, she said. I'm trying to make you understand what it's like to be a woman in this business. Every single day, we have to prove ourselves in ways that men do not. We have to be twice as good to get half the recognition, and we have to do it all while people question whether we're doing it right. Jimmy nodded slowly, looking regretful. I understand. Or at least I'm beginning to understand. And I'm genuinely sorry for my part in perpetuating that. I appreciate that, Leanne said. But an apology isn't enough. Actions matter. How you treat the next female comedian who sits in this chair matters. Whether you do your homework, whether you ask respectful questions, whether you see her as an equal, that's what matters. I hear you, Jimmy said, his voice earnest. I will do better. Leanne studied him for a long moment before glancing out at the audience. It was clear she was weighing something, deciding whether or not to continue. Finally, she spoke. You know what, Jimmy? She said, standing up from her chair. I appreciate your apology. I really do. But I don't think I can sit here anymore. The audience gasped collectively. Jimmy's eyes went wide. Leanne, please, he said, standing up as well. Don't leave. Let's finish this conversation. We did finish it, Leanne said, removing her microphone. I said what I needed to say. You heard me, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything is fine now just because you apologized. That's not how this works. Jimmy looked panicked. His producers were frantically gesturing from off stage, but there was nothing they could do. This was happening live. I respect your work. I really do, Jimmy said desperately. Please stay. We can talk about your tour, about anything you want. Leanne paused, her hand on the microphone pack clipped to her waist. Jimmy, the damage is done. You invited me here under the pretense of a normal interview, and instead, you questioned my credibility as a comedian. You don't get to just move past that like it didn't happen. But we can make this right, Jimmy insisted. We can have a real conversation now, an honest one. We just had an honest conversation, Leanne replied. And honestly, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to sit here and promote my tour on a show where the host didn't even bother to watch my work before I arrived. That's not respect. That's not how you treat a guest. The audience was silent, watching this unfold like a car crash they couldn't look away from. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by Leanne's words. I've been in this business for a long time, Leanne continued, her voice strong and clear. "And I've learned that you have to stand up for yourself. You have to draw lines, and my line is that I will not be disrespected. Not even on national television. Not even when it might hurt my career to walk away." Jimmy looked devastated. "Leanne, I'm begging you. Don't leave like this." "Why not?" Leanne asked, turning to face him fully. "Because it makes you look bad. Because people will talk about this." "Jimmy?" Leanne replied calmly, "Maybe they should talk about this. Maybe people need to see what happens when you disrespect someone and there are actual consequences." "It's not about me looking bad," Jimmy said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "It's about giving you a chance to share your work with this audience. They came here wanting to hear from you." Leanne looked out at the audience, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate every single one of you who came here tonight," she said, her voice warm. "I'm sorry that this interview didn't go the way any of us expected, but I hope you understand why I can't stay." Several audience members began clapping, and soon the entire room was on their feet, cheering for her. It was a surreal moment, an audience applauding a guest for walking off a show. Jimmy stood frozen, looking lost. "This isn't how I wanted this to go." "Then you should have prepared differently," Leanne said simply. "You should have done the work. You should have respected me enough to actually watch my comedy before you criticized it." She finished removing her microphone and handed it to a nearby stagehand. The band was frozen, unsure what to do. The cameras kept rolling. "Can I say one more thing?" Leanne asked, turning back to Jimmy. "Of course," Jimmy replied quickly, hoping maybe she had changed her mind. Leanne turned to the camera, her gaze direct and unwavering. "To any young comedian watching this, especially young women," she said, "do not ever let anyone make you feel like your voice does not matter. Don't let anyone tell you that you need to be someone you're not to be successful. Stay true to yourself, tell your stories your way, and if someone disrespects you, you have every right to walk away." The audience erupted in applause again, many of them standing now. "And, Jimmy," Leanne added, turning back to him one last time, "I hope you learn from this. I hope the next time you have a female comedian on your show, you treat her the way she deserves to be treated. With respect, with preparation, and with an understanding that her comedy is just as valid as anyone else's." "I will," Jimmy said, his voice barely audible. "I promise I will." Leanne nodded once, then turned and walked off the stage. The audience continued clapping as she disappeared behind the curtain. Jimmy stood there, alone, looking shell-shocked, before finally sitting back down at his desk. "We're going to take a break," he said weakly into the camera, and the show cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the interview were spreading across social media. People were picking sides, debating who was right and who was wrong. Some defended Jimmy, saying Leanne had overreacted. Others praised her for standing up for herself and calling out the double standards women face in comedy. Leanne's tour dates started selling out even faster after the incident. Her social media following exploded overnight. People who had never heard of her before were now seeking out her specials, wanting to see what all the fuss was about. And when they watched her comedy, they understood. They understood that she was not playing it safe at all. She was being brave in a way that too many people failed to recognize. The interview became a watershed moment, not just for Leanne, but for conversations about how women in comedy are treated. Other female comedians started sharing their own experiences of being questioned, doubted, and disrespected in ways their male counterparts never were. And through it all, Leanne kept doing what she did best, telling her stories, making people laugh, and proving that you don't have to compromise who you are to be successful. You just have to be brave enough to walk away when someone tries to make you feel less than. So, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Do you think Leanne was right to walk off? Or should she have stayed and finished the interview? Let us know what you think.